The hardest thing I've ever had to do in life is tell the truth in a world full of people that want to believe lies. I get a lot of feedback on my videos, whether it be because I've made a video explaining how the phosphate industry is polluting our waterways, or because your favorite politician is making backdoor deals with developers and maybe the phosphate industry. So I'm going to show you the comments that I've got, and we're going to try to clear up some of these misconceptions. I've been accused of fear-mongering by Joel Lynch in a joint account owned by Lisa and Ken. Ken explained in a video why Edward Medard Park wasn't radioactive and that their kids played there all the time, so it has to be okay. Amanda Sue said I must not have been an industrial welder because I didn't know the difference between a phosphate mine and a processing plant, and it's really easy to learn between a phosphate mine and a processing plant. Bill McBride said that the drag lines are just digging up dirt and that every rock has some sort of radiation or radon to it. That's a fact. Naturally occurring radioactive material. Anywhere on Earth you could put down a Geiger meter and it'll give you a background reading. He goes on to say the radiation concerns is when it goes to the plant and they dump sulfuric acid on it. That's when it becomes more radioactive in the phosphate gypsum. That's not a fact. SCC Library Girl and Lizzie B think I made a video on behalf of Ken Hagen to make Josh Woostel look bad. Josh Woostel makes Josh Woostel look bad. All right, let's dive into it. Number one, never trust a man whose wife doesn't trust him enough to have his own Facebook account. And all of those that have said I haven't done my research into these subjects, I'm going to show you my research and you can show me yours. According to the Florida Phosphate Institute, it has been known since the early part of this century that Central Florida phosphate deposits contain more uranium and consequently more uranium decay products than any other rock or soil on Earth. That's how you get the radioactive material in gypsum. You can't take something non-radioactive, dump sulfuric acid on it to strip it and get something radioactive. For those of you out there that believe these old mines turned parks pose absolutely no adverse health effects to the public that goes out there to enjoy them, you probably also believe that Anna Nicole Smith married for love and that Trenton, New Jersey still makes what the world takes. Think about this for a minute. These mining companies gave the state thousands of acres of land in Central Florida. That land would be worth millions of dollars if there wasn't something wrong with it. If they could have turned around and built houses on that land, they would have. They would have built houses and sold them for $500,000–$600,000 a piece because it's in Central Florida. It's right between Orlando and Tampa, right next to I-4. It's right in the perfect spot for building houses. So why did we turn them all into parks? There was one phosphate mine in Lakeland where houses were built on top of. That was the Poseidon mine, and it was owned by Drummond. Drummond knew since the early 70s that radiation levels were 11 to 21 times the acceptable limits. Residents weren't warned about the radiation concerns and they got very sick. Lawsuits followed, and it recently got settled for an undisclosed amount. Mining activities redistributed radium-226 throughout the entire Poseidon mine. Radium-226, when it decays, produces radon gas, a known carcinogenic. There is no safe level of exposure to radon gas, according to the federal EPA. Edward Medard Park is a former phosphate mine. It was owned by the American Cyanamine Company, and they donated it to the state, and the state leases it to Hillsborough County, who turned it into a park. I put a Geiger meter down on the disc golf course. The disc golf course, those weird hills with the trees, those are old phosphate tailings. The Geiger meter went crazy. The readings were so high that Hillsborough County sent out a so-called specialist out there to do a limited ionizing radiation test. They found the exact same readings that I did. They recommended a 3.5 hour per day time limit out there. That's how they made it sound like everything was safe. Bureaucrats didn't read this. They got to social media and they called me everything but a welder, even though I had the skills to prove I'm a good welder. They said enjoy the park and all of its amenities. I've dealt with the federal EPA and the Florida Department of Environmental Protections when it comes to radiation concerns on former phosphate mined lands. They both claim that the only agency equipped to handle radiation concerns on formerly mined land is the Florida Department of Health. So why did Hillsborough County use a third-party tester? Perhaps it's because a third party will give you the conclusion that you are looking for. I found the same kind of readings in the Alafaya River State Park. That was another former phosphate mine. I've also found high readings in Tannarock out there in Lakeland. That is a public use area operated by the state. And Tannarock is the key to proving that all of these sites are not as safe as your local bureaucrats want to make them out to be. In the early 2000s, the federal EPA wanted to add formerly mined phosphate lands to the national priority list, which would classify them as a Superfund site. They didn't do this. They backed out in 2014 after 5 Florida state representatives pressured the federal EPA to abandon their plans to classify these lands as Superfund lists. They even wrote a letter to the administrator of the EPA and said, listen, we do not want you coming into our district and doing aerial radiation surveying over top of these phosphate mines. We want advance notices. It's going to give us a bad stigma to the industry. I call these bureaucrats the Phosphate Five. Gus Bilirakis, Vern Buchanan, Thomas Rooney, Richard Nugent, and Dennis Ross were the 5 bureaucrats that signed that letter and sent it to the EPA. But thankfully, the federal EPA was already in the state of Florida doing assessments on some of these old mine sites. And although they didn't do one that I could find on Edward Medard Park, they did do one on Tanner Rock Public Use Area. Tanner Rock was the mine for Cornet Industries. Tanner Rock is simply Cornet spelled backwards. Cornet, a lot of residents around that plant got sick. They found arsenic in the ground. And wouldn't you know, when the federal EPA was at Tanner Rock, they too found arsenic in some of the ground that they surveyed. All throughout the assessment done at Tanner Rock, you can see the results for radium-226 exceed the EPA Superfund cancer risk screening value. They found arsenic, they found lead, they found cadmium, barium, you name it. All kinds of heavy metals have been found out there at Tanner Rock. If you have any question if these sites are safe for you and your children, the EPA concluded that these sites are a hazard for children because of on-site contaminants and physical hazards. With all these contaminants we just learned about that are present at these old mine sites, if you were going to sell a house to unsuspecting residents, how would you do it? Here's how one developer is planning on turning a phosphate mine into the next big subdivision in Dover.
Big things are literally growing in Dover, Florida. 3,000 acres of former phosphate mining land, once just dirt and dreams, is about to level up. They're adding 1,200 homes in what's called a residential agrihood. Yeah, that's a neighborhood with a farm. Think fresh eggs, seasonal veggies, and a vibe so wholesome even your grandma would move in.
Now, I've sent all these documents that I have to the local county commissioners about this agrihood that they're building, trying to warn them that Granny is going to be glowing green if she eats those vegetables. They sent back that they have to approve these houses there and they have to give the developer what they want because the developer has constitutional rights. That's what Josh Woostel's legislative aide sent back to me when I emailed the board the Phosphate Initiative documents, and those documents pertain to Oak Ridge and grassland communities, and they told them exactly how residents would get sick if they continued to try to build on this land in Dover. The constitutional rights of developers trump public safety concerns, according to Josh Woostel's legislative aide. People think Josh Woostel is different than Ken Hagan. They both use the same political consultant. Josh Woostel's political committee is registered at 1509 East 9th Avenue, Ebo City. Now look at this flyer from Ken Hagan. It comes from the same place. The return address, 1509 East 9th Avenue, Ebo City. I'm Matt the Welder. God bless America, and I really miss Jerry Reed.